The Old West bleeds red, not from outlaws but from creatures wearing human skin. Elias Crow has silver. They have fangs. Tonight the hunt begins. Brace yourself. Subscribe to the channel to help us. Leave a like and tell me where you are watching the story from. The wind howled across the parched plains, not just a whisper but a low, mournful lament, carrying dust and the acrid scent of old iron. It scraped against the lone rider, Elias Crow, a cowboy etched by sun and hardship, his gaze distant, framed by the brim of a worn-out Stetson. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in violent hues of crimson and orange, as if the very heavens were weeping blood. No one, not a soul with an ounce of sense, dared to ride alone in these parts. Once dusk bled into night, everyone knew the stories. Everyone had heard the guttural howls that echoed from the vast, unforgiving desert. Werewolves, they said, creatures that walked among men and beasts, hidden beneath human skin by day, but unbound, unleashed when the moon claimed its throne. But for Elias Crow, a solitary figure with tired eyes and a threadbare coat, these weren't legends. This was his life. This was his damnation. Elias hadn't been born a hunter. He was the son of a simple Texas rancher, raised on the backs of horses and the taste of dust, believing the worst he might ever face were the outlaws who occasionally drifted through their territory. That simple world shattered the night his family was torn apart. A brutal, savage attack, teeth against flesh, screams swallowed by the suffocating darkness. When dawn finally broke, the ranch was eerily silent, save for the raucous caw of crows squabbling over bone. He survived, but only because the beast, the thing, had chosen to leave him alive, to plant a seed of pure, unadulterated hatred that had festered and grown into an unholy oak within his soul. Since that night, Elias had made the hunt his grim destiny. He learned to track, to read the faintest prints in the hardened earth, to distinguish the metallic tang of fresh blood on the wind. He carried adapted weapons, silver bullets, cast from his mother's crucifix, each a painful remembrance, sharpened stakes of consecrated oak hardened by fire, and chains blessed by a lonely, terrified priest in a forgotten mission. He hunted not for glory, nor for the pitiful bounty some towns dared to offer. He hunted because someone had to, because the world was too soft, too ignorant, too damn scared to face the truth. Tonight, Elias followed a fresh trail. An entire herd of cattle found mutilated, scattered across a ranch like broken toys, their innards splayed, their eyes staring sightlessly at the indifferent sky. It wasn't the work of coyotes, nor a mountain lion. He knew the signature, the wide, tearing bite, the heavy drag marks of powerful hind legs, the deep, jagged cuts made by claws that belonged to no ordinary animal, the kind of claws that could rip a man apart. The silence of the prairie pressed down, heavy and suffocating. Only the creak of saddle leather and the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves broke the encroaching darkness. Elias didn't need a map. The scent of death, thick and cloying, guided him with an unerring, horrifying precision. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Shadow, nickered nervously, its ears twitching, sensing the unnatural terror that clung to the air. Even Shadow, a creature of instinct, knew something was profoundly wrong. Elias patted its neck, a silent promise of protection, knowing it was a promise he might not be able to keep. His gaze swept the darkening plains, seeing shapes that weren't there, hearing phantom whispers on the wind. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to contort into something monstrous. He pulled his Winchester rifle from its sheath, the cold steel of familiar comfort against his calloused hand. The moonlight, now a thin crescent, offered little illumination, only enough to deepen the looming shadows. This was the hour when their world bled into ours, when the thin veil tore. He rode for what felt like an eternity, the temperature dropping sharply, the air growing crisp with an unnatural chill. Finally, in the distance, a faint flicker of light, like a dying ember, announced his arrival at a small town. A collection of precarious wooden houses, their oil lanterns trembling in the oppressive night. Redemption Gulch. The name itself felt like a cruel joke. As he drew closer, the town didn't greet him with the usual sounds of frontier life. No distant fiddle music from a saloon, no shouts from a blacksmith, no laughter from children. Just an unnerving, profound quiet. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy and suffocating. A place where fear had settled like dust on every porch, behind every drawn curtain. Elias felt it in his bones, the collective dread, a palpable weight that made the hairs on his neck prickle. The people here, they avoided looking at him, knew who he was, knew what he did. To some, Elias Crow was a necessary evil, a grim reaper to dispatch the horrors others couldn't comprehend. To others, he was just a reminder that evil existed and walked among them, occasionally in human form. And that thought, above all else, was the most unsettling. Elias dismounted Shadow at the dusty hitching post outside the Maverick Saloon. The animal shuddered, tossing its head, its eyes wide with an instinctual fear that mirrored the dread in the town. Elias gave a reassuring pat, murmuring, "Easy, boy, almost done." But he wasn't sure if he was talking to the horse or himself. The saloon's battered sign creaked in the desolate breeze, a mournful welcome. Inside, the usual raucous piano was silent, and the scattered men hunched over their drinks in hushed, uncomfortable stillness. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer, cheap tobacco, and an undercurrent of something else, fear, palpable and cold. Elias pushed open the swinging doors. The squeal of the hinges echoed in the unnatural quiet, drawing every pair of eyes in the room. His spurs clinked on the worn wooden floorboards, each step a pronounced punctuation mark in the heavy silence. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, ignoring the averted gazes, the sudden shifts, the uneasy coughs. He'd seen it 100 times before. Men who talked tough under the noonday sun turned into shadows when the real darkness came. He stopped at the bar, placing his rifle against the polished wood. "Whiskey," he said, his voice a low rumble, worn like old leather. "And a bowl of oats for my horse. Leave him tied out front for now." Jed, the barkeep, a man whose face was a road map of worry lines, moved slowly, his hands trembling as he poured the amber liquid. He didn't meet Elias's eyes, instead focusing intently on the chipped glass. "Ain't many folks ride through Redemption Gulch after sunset, Mr. Crow," Jed mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias took the glass but didn't drink. His gaze, piercing and unwavering, finally settled on Jed. "I do." Jed swallowed hard, wiping down the already clean bar with a rag that seemed to have seen better days a decade ago. "Heard about the Blackwood Ranch. Heard what happened to old man Davy's herd." Jed leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping even lower. "Folks here, they're saying it ain't just one of 'em, Mr. Crow. They're saying it's a whole damn pack, and a mean one at that." Elias raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his tired eyes. "Then it's bigger work." The silence that followed was even heavier than before, thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody responded. Nobody dared to offer help. This was Elias's burden, his alone. The men at the tables shifted, some taking hurried sips of their drinks, others just staring into the depths of their glasses as if seeking answers there. Elias's eyes scanned the room, picking up on the small details. A young man, barely out of his teens, named Billy, sat alone, nervously twisting his hat. His face was pale, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to burst through the walls. Over in a shadowed corner, two older men, their faces etched with the deep lines of hard living, spoke in hushed tones, their heads almost touching. They probably thought no one could hear them over the background hum of the saloon, but Elias's senses were honed sharp, like a predator's. "Gone missing too, old Silas Miller," one of them, a gaunt man with a missing tooth, whispered. "Just last week. Sheriff Brody ain't found a trace. Said he probably just up and rode off." The other man, heavier, with a thick gray beard, scoffed softly. "Silas ain't one to just up and leave, not with that spread of his. And he weren't no fool neither. Knew these lands like the back of his hand. What about Mary Beth's boy, Lucas?" The first man continued, a tremor in his voice. "2 nights ago, just vanished from his bed. Window found wide open but no sign of forced entry. Just gone. A cold knot tightened in Elias's gut. Missing people. That wasn't just a hungry pack, that hinted at something far more organized, far more insidious. Feral beasts usually left remains. Clean disappearances. That was a different kind of horror. That was something taking its prey deliberately, perhaps even alive. The whispers continued, painting a picture of a town under siege, not just by monstrous animals, but by an unseen, intelligent malevolence. The fear wasn't just of being attacked, it was of being chosen. Jed, sensing Elias's sudden focus, quickly returned to his task, polishing the same spot on the bar with renewed vigor. "Best be careful out there, Mr. Crow," he said, his voice strained. "There's talk, old legends, you know, of the ones who don't just turn with the moon but walk among us all the time. Folks who know what they are, who welcome the change." He glanced furtively around the saloon, his eyes wide before shrinking back, as if he'd said too much. Elias's gaze remained fixed on Jed, then swept across the room again, slowly, deliberately. Every face he saw now seemed to hold a flicker of something more than fear. Suspicion? Guilt? The thought chilled him more than any direct threat. If the pack had a human element, it meant their hunting ground was far wider, their cunning far deeper. It meant the enemy could be anyone. Elias paid for his whiskey, still untouched, and the oats for Shadow, which the mare had already devoured with nervous gulps. He left the Maverick saloon as silently as he'd entered, the eyes of Redemption Gulch still burning holes in his back. The town's meager lights receded quickly as he rode out, swallowed by the inky blackness of the desert night. The full moon was still hours away, a distant promise on the eastern horizon, but the darkness was already profound, heavy, oppressive. It felt as though the very air resisted the light, clinging to the shadows. He didn't need to ask for directions. The trail of destruction at the Blackwood Ranch had pointed west, towards the desolate Badlands, a maze of ancient rock formations and crumbling canyons. A place where few men ventured, and those who did often didn't return. Perfect hunting ground for creatures that thrived in the dark, that yearned for isolation. Elias rode at a steady pace, Shadow's hooves kicking up plumes of fine dust that shimmered faintly under the meager starlight. He dismounted frequently, his trained eyes scanning the ground, tracing the invisible narrative left by the pack. The mutilated cattle weren't just a feed. They were a message, a cruel game. He found broad paw prints, undeniably lupine, but too large, too defined to be mere wolves. The stride was long, powerful, hinting at bipedal movement. He knelt, running a gloved finger along the edge of a particularly deep print. Too much weight, too much force. These weren't just animals. Further along, the trail led him into a narrow, winding arroyo, its walls rising steeply, jagged and inhospitable. Here, the signs grew more disturbing. Scratches on the rock face higher than any mountain lion could reach, long and deep, as if something had scaled the sheer stone with ease. He found tufts of dark, coarse hair snagged on thorny brush, each strand thick as wire. He picked one up, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. It smelled vaguely of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and rotten, like stale blood. The deeper he rode, the more unsettling the landscape became. Twisted, gnarled mesquite trees, their branches resembling skeletal fingers, clawed at the night sky. The wind, which had been a mournful howl, now seemed to whisper, rustling through unseen crevices, creating phantom voices. Elias felt a profound sense of isolation, a primal fear that gnawed at the edges of his hardened resolve. He was alone out here, truly alone, miles from any help, pursuing monsters that defied reason. Then he saw it. Etched into a smooth, dark piece of sandstone, half obscured by wind-blown grit, was a symbol, not a natural marking. It was a crude, angular design, a circle intersected by jagged lines, resembling a stylized wolf's head. or perhaps a snarling maw. It was rough, primal, yet undeniably deliberate. It pulsed with an almost tangible malevolence. This wasn't just the territorial mark of a beast, it was a dark declaration. The whisperings in Redemption Gulch about an organized threat, about those who welcomed the change, echoed in his mind. These weren't just animals acting on instinct. This was something darker, something with a purpose. He continued, his senses heightened, every fiber of his being tuned to the desert's subtle language. The air grew colder, heavy with a dampness that spoke of unseen water sources, or perhaps simply the approaching full moon. He thought he heard a distant rustle, a skittering sound that was too heavy for a rabbit, too swift for a coyote. He stopped, holding his breath, rifle ready. Nothing, just the vast, suffocating silence. He was being watched. He knew it. The hunter was becoming the hunted, and the roles blurred in the suffocating darkness. As he moved deeper into the canyon lands, the moon, now a bloated, sickly yellow, began its slow ascent, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed around him. Each rock seemed to morph into a lurking figure, each bush a crouching predator. The wind began to pick up again, stronger this time, whistling through the canyons, producing eerie, flute-like sounds that echoed and multiplied, creating an unearthly chorus. Then, high above, silhouetted against the nascent moonlight, Elias spotted it. A fleeting shadow, too large, too swift, too unnervingly human-shaped to be a mere wolf. It darted across the pinnacle of a distant ridge, a brief, impossible silhouette against the pale sky, before vanishing over the horizon. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving him questioning if his exhausted mind had played tricks on him. But the cold dread that settled in his gut told him otherwise. It was a reconnaissance, a scout, and it had seen him. The impossible shadow vanished, but the unsettling image remained burned behind Elias's eyes, a chilling premonition. He gripped the reins tighter, urging Shadow forward, the horse sensing his rider's renewed urgency. The desert night, which had moments before seemed merely foreboding, now felt predatory, actively hostile. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the whisper of sharp claws on stone, every rustle of dry brush the soft padding of heavy paws. His mind, however, wasn't entirely on the immediate dangers. The sighting had dragged him back, as it always did in moments of heightened tension, to that night. The night that had irrevocably fractured his life and forged him into the grim hunter he had become. The memories were a curse, an open wound that refused to heal, constantly seeping venom into his soul. It had been a harvest moon, fat and full, casting a deceptively peaceful glow over their small Texas ranch. Elias, a strapping young man then, full of the dreams and simple ambitions of a rancher's son, had been out checking fences with his pa, Thomas Crow. His ma, Eleanor, would have been inside, humming a quiet tune as she baked bread, the scent of yeast and warmth filling their humble home. His little sister, Clara, barely 6 years old, would have been playing with her rag doll, her innocent laughter echoing through the sturdy log walls. A perfect evening, ordinary and beautiful. Then the howling started. Not the familiar yips of coyotes, nor the deep baying of a lost hound. This was different, a primal guttural cry that seemed to rip through the very fabric of the night, cold and heavy with an ancient menace. Thomas, a man who feared nothing human, had gone for his rifle, his brow furrowed with concern. "Sounds like a whole pack," he'd muttered, though his eyes held a flicker of something Elias had never seen before. Pure, unadulterated terror. They hadn't even reached the barn when the screams started from the house. Clara's high-pitched shriek, then Ma's muffled cry. The world had gone red. Elias remembered sprinting, his lungs burning, his father close behind him, shouting a desperate warning that Elias hadn't understood. The door was ripped from its hinges, splintered wood scattered like kindling. Inside it was chaos, a nightmare brought to life. Hulking, shaggy forms moved with impossible speed in the moonlight streaming through the shattered windows. Yellow eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence. Claws tore at everything, rending flesh, shredding fabric. Elias had seen his ma, her gentle face contorted in a silent scream, falling under the assault of a beast with fur the color of dried blood. His pa, a strong man, was already on the ground, his rifle uselessly tangled in his hands, as another monster, larger than the rest, tore at his throat. Clara. Oh God, Clara. She'd been snatched from her hiding place behind the overturned table, her rag doll tossed aside. The largest of them all, a monstrous creature with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight, stood over her. Its head was thrown back in a silent, savage roar, its jaws wide, glistening with gore. And then a sickening crunch. Elias, paralyzed by horror, had done nothing. He couldn't. His body had refused to obey, his mind overwhelmed by the sheer, overwhelming brutality. He remembered falling to his knees, not in prayer, but in utter defeat. He'd watched helpless as his entire world dissolved into a bloody tableau. Then the monster, the dark alpha, had turned its head, its eyes burning crimson fixed on him, and on its snout, a jagged ancient scar, like a lightning bolt against its dark fur. It had advanced slowly, deliberately, its massive form casting a terrifying shadow. Elias had braced himself for the end, for the tearing teeth, the agonizing death. But it hadn't come. Instead, the alpha had merely snarled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through Elias's very bones, a sound that seemed to mock his fear, to revel in his helplessness. And then it had turned, vanishing into the night, leaving him alone amidst the carnage, alive but utterly, irrevocably broken. Why? Why had it spared him? That question had haunted him, fueling a desperate, burning rage that dwarfed even his grief. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a twisted mercy that had condemned him to a life of vengeance. He'd spent the subsequent years learning from old-timers, from faded books, from whisperings in forgotten taverns. He learned about silver, about consecrated ground, about the ancient rites that bound these monsters. He melted down his mother's silver crucifix, forging the precious metal into bullets, each one a prayer and a curse. He honed his tracking skills, his marksmanship, his body into a weapon. He became the thing that hunted other things, Elias Crow, the werewolf hunter. Back in the present, a sharp gust of wind brought him back to the cold reality of the desert night. He was still riding, the canyons looming around him. He dismounted, Shadow nudging him with a soft wicker. His eyes caught on something, a gnarled desert oak, its ancient bark twisted and scarred, and on its trunk, fresh scratch marks. 3 deep parallel gouges, higher than any bear could reach, wider than any puma. He traced them with his finger, a cold dread seeping into his bones, the distinctive width, the brutal depth. And then, his gaze fell lower. A fainter, older mark, almost perfectly faded but unmistakably there. A jagged line like a lightning bolt carved into the wood. The same scar. The alpha. His nemesis. It was near. The discovery of the alpha's mark infused Elias with a renewed, cold determination, sharpening his focus, even as it churned his gut with a familiar, acidic fear. He pressed on, Shadow now moving with a cautious, almost tiptoeing gait, her head held low, nostrils flaring. The trail of prints grew bolder, more frequent, leading him deeper into the desolate heart of the canyon lands. The air grew colder still, carrying a faint, earthy smell, mingling with the metallic tang of blood that had been clinging to the wind for hours. He finally arrived at what felt like the epicenter of their domain. A vast, natural amphitheater, its towering rock walls rising like ancient sentinels, stark and formidable against the bruised sky. The full moon, now fully ascended, hung bloated and indifferent above the canyon rim, bathing the entire scene in an eerie silver-blue glow. Every shadow stretched and writhed, transforming familiar rock formations into monstrous lurking figures. This was it, the meeting place, the killing ground. Elias dismounted, the soft clatter of his spurs sounding deafening in the profound silence. He moved with practiced efficiency, unfastening the saddlebags, retrieving his arsenal. His Winchester rifle, its stock worn smooth by countless hunts, was already loaded with silver rounds. He checked his Colt Peacemaker, holstered on his hip, each chamber housing a hand-cast silver slug. From a leather pouch, he pulled out a handful of additional bullets, their dull sheen almost swallowed by the moonlight. He took out his silver knife, the blade sharp enough to shave with, its hilt wrapped in blessed leather. Finally, the consecrated chain, its links made of pure silver, wound tightly around his belt, a last desperate resort. Each item was a heavy burden, a testament to the grim work he performed. He found a strategic position behind a cluster of massive boulders, offering a good vantage point and some cover. From here, he could survey a significant portion of the canyon floor, a wide, flat expanse of cracked earth and scattered stones. The wind, which had been whipping fiercely, had momentarily died down, leaving an oppressive, heavy stillness that seemed to suck all sound from the world. Then it began. A single howl, deep and mournful, ripped through the silence from high above, echoing off the canyon walls. It was a sound that vibrated in Elias's very bones, ancient and full of predatory hunger. He gripped his rifle tighter, his knuckles white. Then another, and another, from every direction now. The calls rose in a terrifying chorus, building in intensity, intertwining, until the entire canyon seemed to throb with the raw, untamed fury of the beasts. It wasn't just a pack. It was a multitude. The ground seemed to hum with their collective hunger, their chilling anticipation. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum in his chest, but his breathing remained slow, controlled. He was a hunter, and this was his vigil. But as the cacophony reached its crescendo, Elias noticed something. Some of the howls didn't quite fit. A few, faint and almost imperceptible, seemed to emanate not from the towering cliffs ahead, but from behind him, from the direction of Redemption Gulch. A cold dread, far deeper than his familiar fear of the beasts themselves, snaked through him. Had they circled around, or was it something else? Something more sinister, closer to the town than he'd imagined? The idea of being flanked, of being surrounded even from the direction he'd come, unsettled him profoundly. He pressed himself tighter against the cold stone, his eyes darting through the moon-drenched landscape, searching for any telltale movement. The howls continued to reverberate, a symphony of dread, confirming their numbers, their proximity. He could almost taste their bloodlust in the chilled air. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic glint caught his eye. It was high up on a craggy precipice across the canyon, almost blending with the moonlit rock. Not the reflected gleam of an animal's eye, but something colder, sharper, too precise, something man-made. It caught the moonlight for just a fraction of a second, then vanished. A binocular lens? A piece of polished steel? Elias narrowed his eyes, straining to see. Who would be up there, watching, observing? It added a layer of chilling calculation to the primal horror, confirming the unnerving whispers from Redemption Gulch. This wasn't just a wild pack. This was orchestrated. And the orchestrator was here. The metallic glint, fleeting and sinister, snapped Elias fully into the present, every nerve ending screaming. His suspicion, fueled by Jed's warnings and the strange symbols, solidified into a grim certainty. He wasn't just facing a pack of monsters. He was facing an organized threat. The howls reached a fever pitch, then abruptly, terrifyingly, ceased. The sudden silence was more jarring than the cacophony, a prelude to the storm. Then they came. From every shadow, every crevice, every dark fold of the canyon, figures erupted, not just running but leaping. Huge, hulking forms covered in coarse, dark fur, their bodies rippling with unnatural muscle. They moved with a terrifying grace, blurring the lines between man and beast, bounding on powerful legs, sometimes on 2, sometimes on 4, their movements agile, deadly. Their eyes, glowing an eerie, malevolent yellow in the moonlight, were fixed on him, burning with an insatiable hunger. Elias raised his Winchester, its cold steel a familiar extension of his will. He sighted on the largest, most aggressive creature leading the charge, a brute with scarred ears and a mottled gray coat. He squeezed the trigger. The thunderous roar of the rifle echoed through the canyon, momentarily silencing the terrifying growls. The silver bullet, forged from his mother's sacred crucifix, tore through the night, a streak of vengeance. It slammed into the gray werewolf's chest with a sickening thud. The creature let out a tortured shriek, more human than animal, and stumbled, its massive body contorting in agony before collapsing, a wisp of dark smoke rising from the wound. The silver burned them from within, a purifying fire that consumed their monstrous essence. But there were more, so many more, a dozen, 2 dozen. They swarmed from the cliffs, a tidal wave of fur and fangs. Elias didn't hesitate. He chambered another round, his movements fluid, practiced. Bang! Another fell, clutching its chest, its guttural cry choked off as it crumpled. He pivoted, scanning the horde, choosing his targets with grim precision. Bang! A third shrieked, its leg blown out, tumbling down a rocky incline. The air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the horrifying stench of burning flesh, mingled with the metallic tang of fresh blood. Elias fought with a cold, desperate fury, a lifetime of pent-up hatred fueling his every move. Each shot was a whisper of his family's names, a payment on a debt long overdue. But they were relentless. Their numbers seemed endless, their ferocity boundless. They were upon him, a tide of snapping jaws and razor claws. One, larger than the others, with eyes like burning coals, lunged from his blind spot. Elias barely had time to react, bringing his rifle up to block the initial attack. The impact was like being hit by a freight train, knocking the breath from his lungs. He felt a searing pain as razor-sharp claws raked across his left shoulder, tearing through his thick leather coat as if it were tissue paper, carving deep furrows into his flesh. A guttural cry escaped his lips, a primal sound of pain and rage. He reeled back, staggering against the boulder, blood blooming darkly on his sleeve. The werewolf pressed its attack, its fangs flashing. Elias, dropping the now useless rifle, instinctively drew his Colt Peacemaker. He fired point-blank into the creature's chest. The silver slug tore through its vitals, and the monster roared, a sound of profound anguish before toppling backward, its limbs spasming in a macabre dance. He gasped for air, clutching his bleeding shoulder, the pain a fiery agony that threatened to consume him. But there was no time for weakness. They kept coming. More werewolves surged forward, their growls a hungry chorus. As he spun to face the next wave, his gaze fell for a fleeting moment on the fallen beast at his feet. Its fur was already smoking, its form beginning to subtly shift, to melt. But before the change could fully set in, Elias saw it. On the creature's bicep, half hidden beneath its shaggy fur, was a crude tribal tattoo. The same angular symbol he had seen etched into the sandstone along the trail. A stylized wolf's head, or snarling maw. A mark of allegiance, a sign of intelligent, organized evil. The sight sent a fresh wave of dread through him. These weren't just feral beasts, they were soldiers, recruits. The implications were chilling. As the fighting intensified, Elias, through the haze of pain and adrenaline, noticed something else. One of the largest werewolves, a dark brute with a strangely regal bearing, wasn't engaging him directly. Instead, it moved with a calculated purpose, circling the periphery of the skirmish, its yellow eyes sweeping over the pack. It let out low, resonant growls, almost like commands, and the other werewolves seemed to respond, shifting their attacks, pressing him harder from certain angles, feinting and weaving with an unnerving coordination. This wasn't just a beast fighting for its life. This was a commander, and it was directing the hunt. The revelation of the tribal tattoo and the sight of the commanding werewolf galvanized Elias, pushing past the pain in his shoulder. This was no mere pack of wild creatures. It was an organized force, directed by a cunning intelligence. His resolve hardened, fueled by a terrifying clarity. These weren't just monsters. They were agents of a deeper darkness. The canyon floor was a maelstrom of violence. The air thrummed with snarls and the clang of silver against bone. Elias, now favoring his injured left arm, relied on his right, the Colt spitting silver death. He moved with a brutal economy, conserving his energy, each shot a calculated strike. He dropped another werewolf that lunged for his legs, its momentum carrying it to his feet, where it twitched and smoked, a grotesque monument to his grim work. But for every one he felled, two seemed to take its place. They moved with astonishing speed, a blur of fur and muscle, overwhelming him with their sheer numbers. Elias emptied his pistol, the click of the hammer on an empty chamber echoing ominously. He didn't panic. He knew this moment would come. With a swift movement, he holstered the empty Colt and drew his silver knife, the blade gleaming faintly in the moonlight, a cold promise of vengeance. He lunged forward, not waiting to be attacked. A massive, shaggy creature with foaming jaws bore down on him. Elias ducked under its sweeping claw, the wind of the blow rustling his hair, and plunged the silver knife deep into its side, twisting the hilt. The werewolf shrieked, a sound of agony and rage, thrashing violently. Elias held on, feeling the hot, dark blood gush over his hand, the creature's immense weight threatening to pull him down. With a final desperate heave, he ripped the knife free, leaving the beast to collapse, its monstrous life draining onto the blood-soaked earth. His breath ragged, his vision swimming, Elias pressed back against the jagged rock face he'd chosen for cover, buying himself a precious few seconds. His shoulder throbbed with a fiery agony, and his arm felt heavy, sluggish. He tasted blood in his mouth, though he couldn't tell if it was his own or that of the beast's. The fight was a blur, a chaotic symphony of violence and desperation. He saw flashes of yellow eyes, glimpses of tearing claws, heard the constant guttural growls. He was pushed to his absolute limits. He narrowly dodged a snap from a set of massive jaws that could have taken his head off, the creature's putrid breath hot on his face. He twisted, ducking under another attack, driving his knee into the beast's stomach before bringing the hilt of his silver knife down on its skull with a sickening crack. It staggered back, giving him a moment of respite. The ground was littered with the grotesque, smoking forms of the fallen. But still, they came. The commander werewolf, its dark fur slick with blood, its intelligent eyes gleaming, circled closer. It seemed to direct the remaining members of the pack with subtle barks and menacing glances. Elias locked eyes with it, recognizing the same chilling cunning he'd felt watching him from the ridgeline. This one was different. This one had a mind. As the commander lunged, a swift, powerful blur, Elias braced himself. But before it reached him, it did something truly horrifying. It let out a sound, a guttural half-snarl, half-guttural word that sent an icy shiver down Elias's spine. It wasn't an articulate word, not in any human language he knew, but it was structured. It had intention. It was a chilling, deliberate challenge, filled with ancient malice, a sound that confirmed his deepest, darkest fears. These creatures were not merely infected men. They were a breed apart, perhaps even something older, more terrible than common legend claimed. The sound echoed in the canyon, a twisted mockery of human speech, and in that moment Elias knew with an absolute certainty that he was fighting something far beyond primal savagery. He was fighting something that had tasted humanity and found it wanting. The guttural, word-like snarl of the commanding werewolf ripped through Elias, rattling his very soul. It was a sound that spoke of ancient malevolence, of intelligence twisted into something utterly monstrous. He knew then that the true master of this horror was not far, and as if his dark thoughts had conjured it, the world around him seemed to grow still, the remaining werewolves hesitating in their attacks, their growls fading to low whimpers. Amidst the carnage, a monstrous figure rose, not from the shadows but from a depression in the canyon floor, as if it had been waiting, observing, allowing its subordinates to wear down its prey. This was the Alpha. It was larger than any of the others. its frame a terrifying testament to raw power and brutal strength. Its fur was so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight, a swirling vortex of shadow and menace. Its eyes, unlike the yellow glow of the pack, burned with a terrifying incandescent crimson, twin embers of pure hatred and ancient cruelty. And there, stark against its dark snout, was the mark. The deep, jagged scar, like a lightning bolt that Elias had seen in his nightmares 1,000 times, etched onto the gnarled oak and burned into his memory from that horrific night. Elias froze. For a terrifying, agonizing moment, he was not the hardened hunter, but the helpless rancher's son watching his family torn apart. The sight of that scar, those eyes, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath, rooting him to the spot. It was the same monster. The architect of his ruin, the one that had spared him for reasons he could only guess, but reasons that spoke of a chilling, deliberate malice. The Alpha's presence radiated an ancient, malevolent power that dwarfed that of its pack. It didn't just walk. It commanded the very air around it. The smaller werewolves, even the commander, cowered, lowering their heads, their tails tucked. It was a king of horrors, its reign absolute. Fury, cold and absolute, erupted within Elias, eclipsing his momentary paralysis. All the grief, the years of relentless hunting, the gnawing loneliness, coalesced into a singular burning hatred. This was it, the reckoning. He lunged for his discarded Winchester rifle, desperate to put a silver slug through the heart of his tormentor. But the Alpha was impossibly fast. With a blur of dark fur, it was suddenly between him and the rifle, its immense form blocking the way. Elias cursed, switching tactics. He drew his silver knife, a last, desperate weapon against an immortal nightmare. The Alpha let out a low growl, a rumble that vibrated through the canyon, a sound of grim satisfaction. It advanced, not with a frenzied charge, but with a calculated, almost leisurely pace, as if savoring the moment, playing with its prey. Elias fired his Colt, remembering he had holstered it empty. His hand went to the grip, a desperate instinct, but then remembered. No. Empty. He swore again, savagely. He raised the silver knife, a meager defense against such power. The Alpha lunged, a terrifying display of raw speed and power. Elias barely managed to roll out of the way, feeling the wind of its passing, the impact of its body against the rock sending sprays of shattered stone. His rifle, which he had almost reached, was now further away, kicked by the Alpha's powerful leg into a deeper crevice. It was gone. Elias was disarmed, save for his knife and the chain. He stood alone, facing the monster that had destroyed his life, in the heart of its domain. The Alpha, its crimson eyes burning with a triumphant, knowing malice, fixed its gaze on Elias. It wasn't just hungry. It wanted him to suffer. It wanted him to know despair. It closed the distance in a heartbeat, a dark blur. Its massive claw, tipped with obsidian-sharp talons, swiped at him. Elias ducked, but the sheer force of the blow still caught him, sending him sprawling to the ground. He landed hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body, his head ringing. He tried to scramble back, but it was too late. The Alpha was upon him. It pinned him with one massive paw, its weight crushing, stealing the air from his lungs. Its putrid breath, hot and foul, washed over his face. Its monstrous jaws opened, fangs gleaming, inches from his throat. Elias stared into those burning crimson eyes, and in that fleeting, terrifying moment, he saw not just primal hunger, but a flicker of grim satisfaction, a knowing malice that implied this entire hunt was a twisted personal game, a dark masterpiece the Alpha had been orchestrating for years. The Alpha's putrid breath fogged Elias's face, thick and hot, tasting of old blood and decay. Its fangs, each one a gleaming daggers, hovered inches from his jugular, poised to tear. The immense weight of the beast, pinning him to the cold canyon floor, threatened to crush the very life from him. Every breath was a painful gasp, his chest screaming under the pressure. This wasn't just a battle for vengeance. This was a desperate, agonizing fight for survival, for the right to simply draw another breath. Elias struggled, thrashing his legs, trying to dislodge the alpha's crushing paw. It was useless. The monster merely tightened its grip, a low, triumphant growl rumbling in its chest, vibrating through Elias's body. He could feel the coarse fur, the raw power emanating from the beast. His mind, even through the haze of pain and fear, was frantically searching for an answer, a way out of this impossible snare. He was disarmed, wounded, and utterly at its mercy. He glared into those crimson eyes, seeing his family's final moments replayed in their malevolent depths. The raw fury that had propelled him for so long flared anew, hot and desperate. He wouldn't die like this. Not here, not now. He would not give this monster the satisfaction. His right hand still clutching the silver knife, moved by instinct, a desperate final gamble. He brought it up, a weak, fumbling attempt to plunge it into the alpha's side, into its monstrous heart. But the beast was too quick, too strong. It effortlessly batted his hand away with its other paw, sending the knife skittering across the rock, disappearing into the shadows. Now he was truly weaponless. Despair, cold and absolute, threatened to engulf him. He was spent. His body screamed in agony, his vision blurred at the edges, and the smell of the beast so close was overwhelming. This was the end. His hunt, his life, all ending here, in this desolate canyon, at the jaws of the very monster that had started it all. But then, a flicker, a memory, swift and sharp, pierced through the haze. His mother's crucifix, the silver chain, the last resort. His left hand, the one not pinned beneath the alpha's paw, still held the consecrated silver chain, tightly wrapped around his belt. He'd forgotten it in the frenzy of the fight, a habit ingrained from years of carrying it, an almost unconscious comfort. Now, it was his only hope. With a surge of strength born of utter desperation, Elias shifted his weight, digging his heels into the dirt. The alpha, momentarily surprised by his sudden movement, adjusted its grip, its fangs hovering even closer, a soft whine escaping its throat, a prelude to the kill. This was his chance. He reached for the chain, his fingers fumbling, slick with his own blood and the alpha's putrid saliva. His hand brushed against something hidden beneath its matted fur, a small metallic object, cold and smooth against his fingertips. It felt strangely out of place, not bone or skin, but something foreign, something man-made. No time to investigate. The alpha snarled, its fangs beginning to descend. With a final guttural roar of defiance, Elias pulled the chain free. He threw his right arm, the injured one, around the alpha's massive head, pulling with all his remaining might, hooking the chain around its thick, muscled neck. The consecrated silver bit into its flesh. The alpha roared, not a growl, but a full-throated, agonizing shriek of pure torment, a sound that ripped through the night, echoing off the canyon walls. It bucked, thrashing violently, its immense weight shifting, momentarily loosening its hold on Elias. He seized the opportunity, twisting his body, scrambling to get a better grip on the chain, pulling it tighter, tighter, until the metal bit deep into the alpha's flesh, burning, searing its monstrous hide. The beast writhed, clawing at its own neck, its roars turning into choked gurgles as the silver did its sacred work, burning the darkness from within. Elias held on, his muscles screaming, his bones protesting. The alpha thrashed, its powerful hind legs slamming into him, but he clung to the chain with a desperate, unyielding grip. His life, his vengeance, his very soul depended on this single, agonizing act. He was a man consumed by fire, but he would take the monster down with him. The world spun, his vision blurring, but he held on. The alpha thrashed like a snared leviathan, its roars of agony echoing through the canyon, a horrific symphony of pain and rage. Elias, clinging to the silver chain with a desperate death grip, felt his own body breaking under the strain. The monster's powerful limbs flailed wildly, slamming into him, tearing at his already ravaged flesh. He tasted blood, metallic and hot, filling his mouth, but he didn't loosen his hold. He couldn't. This was the culmination of his life's grim purpose, the final act of a tormented soul. The consecrated silver, biting deep into the alpha's neck, hissed and smoked, burning the monster from the inside out. The smell was horrendous: scorched fur, decaying flesh, and something else, something deeply unnatural, like burning sin. The alpha's crimson eyes, once so full of malevolence, now flickered with a desperate primal fear. It fought with a ferocity born of sheer will to survive, but the silver was its undoing, a poison to its cursed blood. Elias's own strength was fading fast. His shoulders screamed, his ribs felt cracked, and every muscle in his body burned with a fire that rivaled the silver's touch. His vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges, threatening to drag him into unconsciousness. But the image of his family, their faces contorted in terror, fueled his last reserves. Clara's small, innocent face, Ma's gentle eyes, Pa's unwavering strength. They deserved justice. He pulled harder, gritting his teeth, a guttural sound torn from his own throat. The alpha gurgled, a sickening, choked sound, its thrashing weakening, its movements becoming sluggish. The powerful legs buckled, the snarling head lolled. Elias, pouring every ounce of his hatred and pain into his grip, felt the chain tighten, heard the awful, grinding sound of bone against metal. Then, with a sickening final crack that reverberated through the canyon, the alpha's neck gave way. Its monstrous body went limp, collapsing with a heavy thud, spraying dust and blood. A final, shuddering gasp escaped its form. And then silence. Absolute, profound silence. Elias didn't let go immediately. He clung to the chain, his knuckles white, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He watched, transfixed, as the alpha's crimson eyes slowly faded, losing their terrifying glow, becoming dull and lifeless. The dark fur seemed to ripple, the immense form beginning to shrink, to subtly shift, the monstrous facade melting away, revealing the grotesque truth beneath. The remaining members of the pack, who had been watching in stunned silence, their growls reduced to whimpers, now let out a collective, mournful cry. Leaderless, disoriented, their predatory intelligence momentarily replaced by primal fear, they turned. One by one, they melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the depths of the canyon, their forms vanishing with an eerie swiftness. The battlefield was left to Elias, the fallen alpha, and the gruesome evidence of the night's carnage. Elias finally released the chain, his hand trembling uncontrollably. His body, ravaged and broken, gave out. He fell to his knees, then crumpled onto his side, gasping for air, clutching his bloodied shoulder. The ground was cold and hard, soaked with black blood and reeking of burnt flesh. His victory was hollowed by exhaustion, by the immense physical and emotional cost. He had achieved his lifelong quest, exacted his vengeance, but it felt empty. The crushing weight of the alpha's death didn't lift the decades of grief. It just left him utterly, profoundly spent. He lay there for what felt like an eternity, staring up at the full moon, cold and indifferent, still hanging high above the canyon. It shone down on him, a solitary, broken figure surrounded by the grotesque remains of his enemies. The wind, which had been so violent, now whispered softly, a mournful dirge. Through the haze of pain and near unconsciousness, his eyes unfocused, Elias looked up towards the highest cliff edge, and he saw it. A lone figure silhouetted against the waning moon, standing motionless. Not a werewolf. This was human-shaped, tall and slender, yet with an aura of unsettling stillness. It watched him. Just watched. For a long, agonizing moment, their gazes, though distant, seemed to connect. Then, as quickly and silently as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving behind only the cold whisper of the wind and a chilling question that echoed in Elias's ravaged mind. Who was that? And what did they want? The pre-dawn chill bit deep into Elias's bloodied and broken body. He lay on the desolate canyon floor, barely conscious, his breath rattling in his lungs. The image of the shadowy figure on the cliff edge, The unanswered questions clung to him, even as pain threatened to drag him into oblivion. He had killed the Alpha. He had avenged his family, but the victory felt profoundly unsettling, incomplete. As the first sliver of true dawn painted the eastern sky in muted grays and purples, its light slowly revealing the gruesome aftermath, a new sound carried on the wind, the distant rumble of horses and the faint shouts of men. Redemption Gulch had found them. Sheriff Brody, a burly man with a walrus mustache and a perpetual frown, led the small posse. They dismounted cautiously, their faces a mixture of dread and awe as they surveyed the carnage. The canyon floor was a nightmare landscape, twisted, smoking bodies, some still subtly shifting, hinting at their monstrous forms, others already reverting, skin stretched unnaturally over elongated bones, patches of fur clinging to what had once been human flesh. They found Elias at the epicenter, a bloodied, barely breathing figure slumped against the rock, his eyes open but unfocused, staring into the rising sun. He was a wreck, his left shoulder torn open, his face caked with grime and dried blood, his coat shredded. The sheriff, his eyes wide with a horror he rarely showed, knelt beside Elias. "Crow, Elias, are you alive?" His voice was gruff, but there was an undertone of disbelief, of respect, bordering on fear. Elias merely nodded, a small, painful movement. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. The townspeople who had followed the sheriff's posse remained at a distance, their faces pale, their expressions ranging from shock to silent terror. No one rushed forward to offer aid. No one spoke a word of thanks. They looked at the bodies of the beasts, then at Elias, and in their eyes he saw not gratitude, but a profound, uneasy understanding. He was the one who walked in darkness, the living embodiment of the horrors they wished to deny. He was a hero, yes, but a terrifying one, a grim reminder of the evil that lurked just beyond their flickering lamplight. As the sheriff's men began the grim task of clearing the scene, Elias, with a monumental effort, pushed himself into a sitting position. His gaze swept the area around the Alpha's corpse. He remembered the cold, metallic object he'd touched beneath its fur. With trembling fingers, he rummaged through the matted, still-smoking pelt of the deceased Alpha. His fingers closed around something small, cold, and smooth. He pulled it free. It was a tarnished silver locket, intricate in its design, with an unsettling symbol etched into its surface. The same angular, stylized wolf's head he had seen carved into the sandstone and tattooed on the bicep of the fallen commander werewolf. The locket was old, clearly not a common piece of jewelry. It spoke of age, of history, of dark traditions. The locket, combined with the memory of the tattoo and the chilling, half-spoken word from the commander, cemented Elias's darkest fears. This was not just a simple pack of wild, cursed men. This was something far more ancient, more organized, a sinister brotherhood. The Alpha was not just a dominant male. It was perhaps a leader, a chieftain of a dark cult. As the sheriff's men with grim efficiency bagged the monstrous remains, Elias's eyes, ever keen, caught a glint of light from a discarded saddlebag lying half-buried under a tumble of rocks. It wasn't his own. He crawled towards it, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder. The bag was old, made of rough leather, too fine for a common cowboy, too plain for a merchant. It was the kind of bag that belonged to a traveler, a solitary soul. Inside, among some mundane items, a half-eaten jerky stick, a small canteen, a pouch of tobacco, he found it. A weathered journal, its leather cover cracked and faded. He opened it with careful, bloodied hands. The pages were filled with cramped, almost feverish handwriting, and disturbing, intricate drawings. And there, on every second page, dominating the script, was the symbol, the stylized wolf's head. The same symbol etched on the silver locket. The same symbol he'd seen carved into the rock, tattooed on the dead. His blood ran cold despite the morning sun. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a terrifying confirmation. The true evil was not vanquished. It was merely revealed. The journal was a chilling testament. Elias spent the next few days in Redemption Gulch, healing slowly, his body a symphony of aches and pains. The town doctor, a grizzled old man named Doc Sterling, patched him up with gruff efficiency, but the scars, both physical and emotional, ran deeper than any stitch could mend. He kept the locket and journal hidden, guarded, knowing the secrets they held were too dangerous for casual eyes. The journal wasn't a simple diary. It was a chronicle, a history of an ancient order, a brotherhood of lycanthropes, far older and more widespread than common folklore suggested. The entries, written by a man named Alistair Finch, detailed their rituals, their hierarchy, their dark pacts. Finch spoke of the blessing of the moon, of choosing the path, of embracing the beast. He spoke of recruitment, of expanding their influence, of individuals within various towns, seemingly ordinary folk, who were secretly part of their unholy flock. Alistair Finch's journey led him through several small towns across the Texas frontier, Redemption Gulch being his last recorded stop. He mentioned new blood being brought into the fold, new initiates to the pack. Elias reread the names from Jed's saloon whispers. Silas Miller, Lucas, Mary Beth's boy. They weren't just missing, they were conscripted. Or worse, they were the meal for a newly turned monster. The Alpha wasn't just a beast, it was a figurehead, a dark priest in a gruesome cult. The chilling implications settled heavy in Elias's gut. The true threat was not gone. The Alpha was dead, yes, a significant victory, but it was merely a head severed from a much larger, more insidious body. The cult remained. The human element, those who welcomed the change, were still out there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the next full moon to rise. They could be anyone, a merchant, a farmer, even the kindly old woman who sold pies in town. Elias prepared to leave Redemption Gulch. The town, relieved of the immediate threat, slowly returned to its strained semblance of normalcy. The townsfolk still kept their distance, their gazes a mix of fear and an almost reverent apprehension. They knew he had saved them, but they also knew the cost and the shadow he carried. No parades, no thanks, just the heavy silence of fearful awe. He settled his meager tab at Jed's Maverick Saloon, leaving a few extra dollars for the trouble. Jed merely nodded, his eyes weary, but held a newfound respect. "Be careful out there, Mr. Crow," he said, his voice softer than before. "Some things, they ain't meant to be understood." Elias strapped the Winchester back into its sheath, the silver locket and Alistair Finch's journal safely tucked away in his saddlebag, new burdens alongside his old ones. He mounted Shadow, the mare seeming more at ease than before, but Elias knew better. The world was never truly at ease, not for him. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of deep gold and bruised purple. It was a familiar sight, the end of one day, the promise of another. He rode out of Redemption Gulch, leaving the uneasy town behind, a place now temporarily safe, but forever touched by the shadow of the unseen. The plains stretched before him, vast and endless, just as his hunt now seemed. The immediate mission was over, but the true hunt had just begun. He wasn't just tracking a beast, he was unraveling a conspiracy. The fight against the shadows was his unending work. It was his curse, his burden, his solitary path. He was Elias Crow, the werewolf hunter, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that somewhere another howl was waiting to rise, another trail to be followed, another secret to be unearthed. Because even in the heart of the Texas frontier, even under the vast, indifferent sky, evil found a way to thrive. As Elias crested a distant ridge, he glanced back at Redemption Gulch one last time, a collection of tiny lights flickering against the encroaching twilight. From a high window in the town, almost imperceptibly, a curtain twitched. He didn't see it, his gaze already fixed on the vast expanse ahead, but a chill ran down his spine, a hunter's intuition. The true evil he knew remained. Hidden in plain sight, patiently waiting for the next full moon, for the next harvest of souls. The hunt was far from over. Thank you for watching us reading our story. If you enjoyed this tale of the Old West and its hidden horrors, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling narratives. Leave a comment below, tell us what you thought, and don't forget to hit that like button. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Tell us your city and country in the comments.